Good evening and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Stephen Young and I'll be providing commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Will Robinson-Smith has the weekend off, but I'm joined tonight by Adam Bernstein, who is operating our cameras here at the press site, and we're also hoping to bring you some tracking footage from Chuck Briggs. In the center of the screen, you're looking at a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket sitting at the heart of Space Launch Complex 40, also known as Slick 40. In about an hour, SpaceX will attempt to launch the Starlink Group 6-22 mission. This is the 25th dedicated mission to launching SpaceX's upgraded Starlink V2 mini satellites. Currently, SpaceX is targeting a liftoff time of 11:38 p.m. Eastern Time. For our viewers joining from around the world, that's 0338 UTC. SpaceX has delayed tonight's launch twice. The Falcon 9 rocket was rolled to the launch pad a little later than would have been expected for the first launch opportunities of the night. It would have been a record turnaround time between launches, the last launch having occurred just under 4 days ago. If you'd like to support our coverage of the space program, you can do that by hitting the like button and clicking subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted. And you won't miss any of our live coverage of launches from here at Cape Canaveral. And also, please share this stream. It helps more people find our live coverage and everything else going on with our channel. We can't do these broadcasts without the support of our members and viewers, and we want to thank everyone who has made a contribution to help fund our coverage. At the moment, we're in the process of upgrading our broadcast equipment here at the Kennedy Space Center so that we can bring you every launch in 4K. So any contributions you make will go towards the upgrades of that equipment. If you become a member of our channel, you can get access to special members-only videos and also get discounts on our online shop. So at this point, we're about 20 minutes away from the time at which the launch director will give their go for the start of propellant load for tonight's launch, if everything is going according to plan. For those who haven't joined us on a recent launch, SpaceX is no longer providing live mission audio ahead of the final 5 minutes of the countdown. So we're going to have to draw upon our extensive experience covering these launches to guide you through the countdown, and we'll talk about some of the visual clues that will let us know that things are on track. SpaceX is running the countdown tonight from its Hangar X facility at Kennedy Space Center. That's the facility where they refurbish Falcon boosters and prepare them for flight. SpaceX also is supporting this launch from control rooms at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So once again, tonight's launch is targeting at T0 of 11:38 p.m. Eastern Time, 0338 UTC. The weather tonight looks pretty good for the launch. There is a layer of cloud that's fairly thin over the spaceport area tonight. Coming into the launch attempt, the 45th Weather Squadron was forecasting an 80% chance of favorable weather for liftoff. The primary concern for tonight was thick clouds. However, it does appear at the moment that those thick clouds have not materialized. Should SpaceX need to delay the launch to tomorrow night, the weather improves to a 95% favorable chance of launch. Let's take a look at the countdown timeline for today's Starlink mission. As I mentioned earlier, at T-minus 38 minutes, we should hear the results of the go, no-go poll from the launch director, hopefully in a tweet from SpaceX. They sometimes confirm that they are go for propellant load. Other times, they just say that the launch remains targeted for a specific time. And if the go is given, propellant load will start at the T-minus 35 minutes. Kerosene will be loaded onto the first and second stages. Also, liquid oxygen will be pumped aboard the first stage. The first really big visual cue that we will see is the start of a buildup of frost and vapor around the first stage of the booster that you can see on the right side of the screen here. I think we may actually be able to see a little bit of venting from ground equipment down at the base of the rocket, so hopefully that's a good sign that things are proceeding tonight. So that's the start of fueling. The next major milestone will be the so-called big vent, which happens around the T-minus 20-minute mark. That comes ahead of the start of the loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage of the rocket. The big vent is when the strongback structure is chilled down prior to the start of that liquid oxygen load beginning. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines will get underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. This will protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be reported full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strongback structure begin to retract from the Falcon 9 rocket. It will recline to an angle of about 1.5 degrees, lining back ever so slightly from the Falcon 9. It will stay in that position until liftoff. Then, at the moment of liftoff, that strongback will pull back in a more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9 off the pad. At about T-minus 2 minutes, liquid oxygen loading should be complete. At this point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellants. And then in the final 60 seconds of the countdown, control will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. Around about 45 seconds before launch, we should hear the SpaceX launch director give their final go for liftoff. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. If all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will give the command to release the hold down clamps and the Falcon 9 will lift off. Now T-minus 48 minutes and counting. There's always a lot of interest in the trajectory, and I see some of you asking questions about that in the chat. So we will talk trajectory in a moment, but if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button on our stream. That really helps us out. So let's talk trajectory. The Falcon 9 will lift off from pad Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It will fly in a southeast trajectory towards the Caribbean. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on deck tonight is called a shortfall of gravitas. The upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites. The fairing halves of the rocket will also separate from the Falcon 9 and will ride on parafoils down towards the ocean. SpaceX has mostly perfected the task of recovering the payload fairings, saving about $7 million on every launch. Tonight, the recovery vessel for those fairings is the SpaceX support ship Doug. The company operates 2 recovery ships, Bob and Doug, which are named after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. And they were the astronauts that flew on the Demo 2 mission in May 2020, which was the first mission of the Crew Dragon, the SpaceX Crew Dragon that carried astronauts. Now less than 43 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. At this point, if everything is going according to plan and SpaceX is continuing to target 1138, the launch director should be starting to conduct their poll. It's an electronic poll. It's unlike the polls that a lot of other space companies use, where a verbal go or no-go is given. It is a vote essentially on a computer system. So the go no go poll is conducted with a mouse click from each of the console operators in the Launch Control Center at Hangar X. We're waiting to hear if any updates will come from SpaceX on the social media site that we used to know as Twitter, which is now called X. But so far as we know, the countdown is proceeding towards an 11:38 p.m. liftoff tonight. T-minus 40 minutes and counting. If you're just joining us, you're looking live at Launchpad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where SpaceX is getting ready for the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 22 Starlink satellites. As far as we know, liftoff remains scheduled for 11:38 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. At around this time, the launch director in the control center at Hangar X should be giving their go for the start of propellant load, if indeed everything is on track. We are standing by for any updates from SpaceX. We will also get some clues from the buildup of frost and vapor on the vehicle, which will let us know that that process has begun. If everything is on track, that process of loading propellants aboard the Falcon 9 will begin in about 2 minutes. It will start with the loading of kerosene on the first and second stages of the rocket. At the same time, liquid oxygen will be loaded aboard the first stage of the booster. Now less than a minute to the point at which the loading of propellants should begin. If everything is going according to plan, the propellant tanks will be venting. T-minus 35 minutes and counting. Once again, if everything is on track, kerosene will be flowing into the first and second stages of the Falcon 9, and liquid oxygen will be loaded on the first stage. You can see there is some wind in the area here. You can probably hear that on our microphone and see that in the camera shake. The wind was not listed as a problem for tonight's launch. The primary concern was for thick clouds. T-minus 34 minutes and counting. And we have had confirmation from SpaceX that propellant load has begun for tonight's launch of the Starlink 6-22 mission. So at this stage, liquid oxygen is flowing aboard the first stage of the Falcon 9. and kerosene is being loaded into both the first and second stages. We should start to see the first sign of vapors forming on the outside of the vehicle. If you look towards the base of the rocket, you can see there is a white band, and we will probably see that band start to expand and some wisps of vapor. That vapor is actually the Florida air, the humid Florida air, which actually is a little less humid than usual tonight, coming into contact with the cold surface of the propellant tanks. I think you can start to see that vapor ring starting to expand now and some wisps coming off the rocket. So everything looking good for a liftoff of the Falcon 9 at 11:38 p.m. tonight. T-minus 30 minutes and counting. So we're now less than 30 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. This is the first of 2 Falcon 9s that SpaceX plans to launch tonight. The second Falcon 9 is standing on the launch pad at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California at Space Launch Complex 4 East. It is carrying a slightly smaller load of Starlink satellites, just 21 V2 mini satellites, and it is scheduled for launch at 12:43 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That's 3:43 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 07:43 UTC. And we've already seen the launch of the Vega satellites from French Guiana. The Vega rocket launched with 12 payloads. That mission is still ongoing. So a busy night in spaceflight. Just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button on our stream. That really helps us out. Now 27 minutes until the launch of the Falcon 9. You can now see that band of frost and vapor starting to extend up the Falcon 9 booster. That really serves as a fuel gauge for us to show us how much liquid oxygen has been loaded. On the screen you can see a file photo of what the V2 mini Starlink satellites look like when they're stacked in launch configuration. They are literally flat packed, one on top of each other. A system of hinged retention rods will release the satellites. This photo was taken before the first launch of the V2 mini satellites earlier this year. Tonight will be the 25th launch of these V2 minis. This is also the 45th Starlink launch this year. Each of those satellites weighs about 1,760 pounds, or about 800 kilograms. After the solar panels on the spacecraft unfurl, it has a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon hole thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers. That's a type of ion engine. And these satellites were built in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle. This past Friday, the first satellites for the Amazon Project Kuiper internet network were launched. They were prototypes to test out technology that Amazon will use for that service. A lot of people noted that we have not seen any photographs of those satellites. And although we have seen images such as this of the Starlink V2 minis on the ground, and we've seen some very short videos showing the satellites deploying at the very early stage from the Falcon 9 upper stage, we have also not seen any renderings or photos of the V2 mini version of a Starlink satellite. However, we do have this one image of a satellite in orbit. It was taken by the Australian company Heo Robotics from one of its satellites. They released this photo earlier this year. They claim it was the first direct observation of a Starlink V2 mini. And in this image you can see those solar panels extending from the main body of the satellite. So we're coming up on the T-minus 23-minute mark in the countdown. At this point, cryogenic helium should be flowing into storage spheres on the vehicle. Those tanks are located within the propellant tanks themselves, and that helium is used to pressurize the propulsion system. Wanted to thank everyone who's made a contribution via the Super Chat feature to our coverage tonight. We cannot bring you these broadcasts without the support of our viewers and members. So thank you to everyone who has made a contribution using the Super Chat feature. You can also become a member, and that also supports our coverage. And if you're not able to do either of those things, just hitting the thumbs up button really helps us out. T-minus 22 minutes and counting. We're coming up on one of the big visual events during the countdown. That's the so-called big vent from the strongback structure. The strongback is gradually being obscured in our view from the Kennedy Space Center press site by the crew access tower that is being assembled at pad 40. But you can just about see the top of the strongback sticking out from the top of that tower that is gradually growing there. But the big vent should be entirely visible, even though that tower is in the way. And that should be starting in the next 10 seconds or so. And there we see it. There's the start of the big vent. You can see the blustery wind conditions here tonight are blowing that vapor from the strongback structure away from the vehicle towards the south. Those vapors are released during the process to chill down the propellant lines that run up the strongback. When the countdown hits the T-minus 16-minute mark, those propellant lines will carry liquid oxygen into the upper stage of the Falcon 9. The loading of kerosene aboard that upper stage should have been completed a while ago. Meanwhile, they're continuing to load liquid oxygen and kerosene on the first stage of the booster, and you can see that frost ring continuing to extend up the side of the vehicle. So the loading of liquid oxygen on the second stage, that will get underway in just about 3 minutes from now. And as you can see, the big vent is now subsiding. That chill down process of the strung back propellant lines complete. The starting of loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage will get underway in a few seconds. After launch, the Falcon 9's upper stage will deliver the satellites into their target orbit of 183 miles or 294 kilometers. That's the high point or apogee. The perigee of that orbit, or the low point, will be 177 miles or 285 kilometers. The orbit will be inclined at 43 degrees to the equator. This will be the 14th flight of this particular booster, which has the tail number B1067. The debut of this booster was back in June of 2021 for the CRS-22 mission. That was a flight of SpaceX's Cargo Dragon that sent up more than 7,300 pounds of science and supplies to the International Space Station, along with a pair of rollout solar arrays. This was the second mission under SpaceX's Commercial Resupply Services 2 contract with NASA. Next up for B1067 was its first human mission. And that was the Crew 3 launch on November 11th of 2021. The third launch came just over a month later in December of 2021 with the Turksat 5B launch. B1067 flew a fourth time in April 2022, and it carried the astronauts of the Crew 4 mission. That crew included NASA astronaut Jessica Watkins, who became the first African-American woman to serve on a long-duration mission in space. This was also the debut of the fourth and newest Crew Dragon spacecraft, dubbed Freedom. July 14th was the fifth flight of B-1067 with another cargo Dragon. This time it was the CRS-25 mission that carried 5,800 pounds of supplies to the space station. Flight 6 for this booster was its first Starlink mission. It was the Starlink Group 4-34 flight on September 19th, 2022. Launch number 7 was the geostationary satellite Hotbird 13G for Eutelsat, and that launched on November 3rd, 2022. B-1067's final launch of 2022 came on December 16th with the launch of SES's O3b mPOWER 1 and 2 satellites. Missions 9 through 11 were all Starlink launches. Those included Starlink 5-2 on January 26th, 5-5 on March 24th, and 5-19 on May 14th. Its 12th launch came on June 18th when it launched Cetara, a communication satellite for the Indonesian company PSN. Most recently, it launched on August 17th for the Starlink 6-10 mission. So this will be the 14th flight of the Falcon 9 Booster 1067. If all goes according to plan, it will land on the drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas, in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of the Bahamas. Now less than 10 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. Liftoff remains scheduled for 11:38 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Let's take a quick look at the launch timeline for this mission. The Falcon 9 is scheduled to lift off at 11:38 p.m. tonight. It will reach the point of maximum dynamic pressure 1 minute and 12 seconds into flight. That's when the combination of air pressure and velocity puts the maximum force on the vehicle. The rocket does throttle its engines to minimize that, keep everything within the limits for the structure of the vehicle. 2 minutes, 25 seconds into flight, the first stage main engine cutoff occurs. And that's followed a few seconds later by stage separation. Pneumatic pushers between the stages will aid the separation of the first and second stages. Then we will see ignition of the second stage. It has a single Merlin vacuum engine. That occurs 2 minutes, 35 seconds into flight. Just over 3 minutes into flight is the payload fairing jettison. The first stage will continue to arc upwards before starting its descent, and as it plunges back into the atmosphere, the Falcon 9 first stage booster will perform a 22-second burn known as the entry burn that will slow the rocket and prevent it from burning up in the atmosphere as it hurtles back to Earth. Just over 8 minutes into flight, the Falcon 9 will be in sight of the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, and will ignite its engine for a landing burn. And if all goes according to plan, it will be sitting on the drone ship east of the Bahamas in the Atlantic Ocean, 8 minutes and 26 seconds after liftoff. Meanwhile, the second stage will have completed its job, at least the first part of its job. The first burn, which is the longest burn, and that will be complete 8 minutes and 39 seconds into flight. And then we will see an ignition of that engine for a short 2-second burn, about 54 minutes into flight. And then deployment of the Starlink satellites will occur 1 hour and 5 minutes and 6 seconds after liftoff. So the chill down of the Merlin engines should have been completed by now. And we're nearing the point where the strongback structure will be retracted from the vehicle. So you're starting to hear some of the vents at the launch pad as we're now getting some
strongback lower started.
Now getting some video from SpaceX from their cameras at the launch pad. The strongback retraction is underway. The clamps that hold the strongback to the vehicle are opening up. There you see those clamps now in their open position, and the strongback structure will start to move away from the vehicle. Now less than 4 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. Three and a half minutes to launch. Falcon 9 stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. That strongback structure is retracting to an angle of about 1.5 degrees. That should be complete now.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And we have confirmation of the completion of liquid oxygen loading aboard the first stage. The kerosene load should be complete also. Less than 2.5 minutes to launch now. T-minus 2 minutes. The T-minus 1 minute mark, the Falcon 9's onboard computers will take control of the countdown.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And there we have confirmation of the loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage being complete. You can see some venting as the propellant lines are cleared before liftoff.
Ground gas closeouts.
T-minus 1 minute and counting. The propellant tanks should be pressurizing for flight.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And we have confirmation the onboard computers have taken control of the countdown, awaiting the launch director's final go for launch. 30 seconds.
Facility on countdown. Hold, hold, hold.
And we have a hold.
Launch abort is running.
Countdown has been aborted. That hold came at the T-minus 23 second mark. I believe this is the first time we have had a last-minute hold during the time that SpaceX has been streaming on the X platform, so it's not clear what will happen now to live feed from SpaceX. Hopefully we will hear something on the countdown net to explain why the clock was stopped. When SpaceX fuels a Falcon 9, it's using super-chilled propellants. Those propellants are chilled to a very specific temperature, and if a hold is called, unfortunately, that means the launch is scrubbed, particularly for a launch such as the one we're seeing tonight, where there are not launch opportunities that might be hours apart. SpaceX had 2 more launch opportunities tonight, but they will be coming up within the next hour, and we have never seen firm data from SpaceX as to how long it takes to recycle a Falcon 9, but certainly not something that can be done within an hour. So unfortunately, this means tonight's launch has been scrubbed. We're still hoping that we might hear something on the SpaceX countdown loop. Once again, if you were joining us expecting to have seen a Falcon 9 lifting off from Cape Canaveral's Pad 40, the countdown was halted in the final minute. We were waiting for the launch director's go, and in the end he said the words "hold, hold, hold." And that triggered an abort of the countdown. And now the launch controllers in SpaceX's facility at Hangar X here at the Kennedy Space Center are working to safe the vehicle, determine what caused tonight's problem, and drain fuel from the rocket. They do have launch opportunities tomorrow. And SpaceX has ended its webcast, so we are not likely to get any updates there. We'll hope for some further word from SpaceX, but for now, all we know is that the countdown was halted with 23 seconds left on the clock. The Falcon 9 was to have been the first of 2 launches for SpaceX tonight. Another Falcon 9 carrying 21 Starlink satellites is standing on the launch pad at Space Launch Complex 4 East. That's at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. That launch is scheduled for 3:43 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 12:43 local time. It's unclear if any issue that might have been uncovered during tonight's countdown here at Cape Canaveral will affect that launch. We're still receiving no updates from SpaceX on what caused tonight's scrub. They did end their webcast, which was being carried on the social media site X that was previously known as Twitter. We heard the launch director call the scrub and the abort sequence begin, but we did not hear any further updates on what might have caused that scrub. So if this is an issue that can be quickly resolved, there are 6 launch opportunities available on Monday. And the first of those is at 8:42 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 0042 UTC. Once again, this was to have been the 14th flight for the first stage booster, booster 1067. The rocket and we have now got an update from SpaceX. They are reporting that tonight's scrub was caused by upper level winds, and that the next opportunity is indeed tomorrow at 8:42 p.m. So upper level winds are something that launch companies keep a close eye on. Here at Cape Canaveral, weather balloons are released to measure those winds, and if there is a sudden change in the direction or velocity of those winds at different altitudes, it can cause problems for a rocket during its ascent. To a certain degree, a rocket can be programmed to handle changes in upper level winds, but sometimes those changes are just so radical that launch has to be scrubbed. And that's entirely separate from the ground level winds that are also monitored. And as you could hear tonight from the wind noise on our microphone, there was some ground level winds, but that did not appear to be the problem. So with that news from SpaceX that tonight's launch was scrubbed in its final minute due to upper level winds being out of limits, we will wrap up our coverage of this launch. We'll be back in our Launchpad live stream to provide you with coverage of the second Falcon 9 launch that was scheduled for tonight. That launch is of 21 Starlink V2 mini satellites, and it is scheduled to lift off from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Liftoff there is at 3:43 a.m. Eastern Time, or 12:43 a.m. local time. And for our viewers around the world, that's 07:43 UTC. So we'll bring you coverage of that launch in our Launchpad live stream, and you're going to be redirected to that stream shortly when we end tonight's stream, but you can also find it in our channel. And if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button and come back later tonight for what hopefully will be a Falcon 9 launch from the West Coast, from Vandenberg Space Force Station. So we'll take one last look at the Falcon 9 here at Cape Canaveral, standing on pad 40. Its propellants are now being drained, and the launch team is safing the vehicle as they prepare for another launch attempt tomorrow night. Hopefully those upper level winds will cooperate then, and we should see a launch at 8:42 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Monday night. So once again, thank you for joining us for our live coverage of the 6-22 Starlink mission. We'll be back tomorrow night. Want to thank Adam Bernstein, who has been setting up and operating the cameras here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. Will Robinson-Smith, who, although he is off this weekend, has been managing our social media posts. And Chuck Briggs, who was ready to go with a tracking camera, but unfortunately we did not see a liftoff of the Falcon 9 from Cape Canaveral tonight. So I will wish you good night. Please join us later tonight for the launch from Vandenberg. But until then, it's good night from Spaceflight Now at the Kennedy Space Center.